Time to get up, make a coffee, and get ready to watch the sunrise. Recently, I've been having lots of conversations with people regarding what folk refer to as shadow work. Folk who take on spiritual paths or spirituality, they will create a new identity, a new limited identity as a quote-unquote spiritual ego. And so instead of letting go of their temporary form or their temporary identity in this temporary world, they create further identity, further attachments, further delusions and separations. Because in reality, everything's just one. Everything is connected, everything is life. But with the mind, we project abstraction onto the reality around us, and we create categories, we create forms, separation, this and that, inside, outside, up and down, left and right, past and future, etc. But that's all in our minds, and only ever an abstraction plastered onto the reality, which is just life. It's just one presence, just life, being, just existence. And fundamentally, the point of spirituality is to have an understanding of that beyond conceptual, conceptualization, beyond forms of ideas and things. So not to think as a separate individual, identified as a separate individual, that you understand that life is one, but to have no sense of a separate individual and to actually experience life as oneness. So instead of doing this, instead of having a true realization, a true experience of life as it is, the vast majority of people who go down a spiritual path, they will create a spiritual ego, a spiritual identity instead. And that's where the idea of shadow work comes from. So it's not that we don't change as individuals and we don't become better versions of ourselves. It's that ultimately life and this development of ourselves is like a pond or a puddle. And there's disturbances in the puddle. There's ripples and things. And if you're present with the experience of the oneness around us and within yourself, then that pond of your being will inherently just settle. But if you're trying to do self-work, self-development, you're trying to do shadow work, you're trying to better yourself and all these things, well, all that is you playing around with the puddle and creating more ripples. So your intent is to let the pond settle and you're trying to remove the ripples, but you're creating more ripples because you're putting an effort in to do that. And the only way for that to actually happen is for you to just not engage, to not participate, to not try to, be the doer who's bettering yourself. Observe from a pure state of consciousness, rest in that awareness. Back over here, Roy. Stop trying to sneak away, mate. So you rest in that awareness, that understanding of the reality before you, and you will naturally develop as an individual. You'll naturally become more talented, more skilled, more compassionate, more caring, more wise, more understanding, more calm, more purposeful, more directed, more practical, more useful, etc., etc. better in all ways. You'll continue to blossom and grow in the light of divine presence, divine understanding, divine awareness. So ultimately, at the end of the day, any form of shadow work is a waste of time, a distraction, with a caveat, all right? Any spiritual practice can fall into that category as well. And the caveat which can make it useful is if you have the sensibility of self-inquiry when partaking in any type of practice like this. So if you do any spiritual practice or you do any shadow work, whatever you want to call it, it can only be useful if while doing it you're continually, constantly referring back to the presence, to the being, via asking yourself, who am I? Who is the one that is doing the spiritual practice? Back here, Roy. Who is the one doing the shadow work, the spiritual practice, etc.? Who is the one aware of that self or that temporary form, that identity, who is doing that? Okay, so there's the one that's doing it, the person, the mind, the body. Then there's the awareness of that person. And then there's you. So as long as you keep that in context and you keep referring back to that and asking, who am I in this situation? And you realize I'm not the one practicing. I'm not the one who is aware of the one practicing, because I'm aware of all of this. And you keep coming back to that pure consciousness, then your practice can be useful. But without that, it just becomes further identity, more solidification in form, and it again, it's just a spiritual ego. And that type of ego is usually a lot more ignorant, a lot more dangerous, a lot more harmful to itself and the world around it than a normal human ego that doesn't even think it's anything more than a person. So at the end of the day, ironically, the most damaging and the most harmful ego identities are those which are spiritual egos, and they identify with their spiritual identity, their idea of themselves as a spiritual being. When the whole idea of spirituality is to let go of those identities and to just be present with the oneness of life. I travelled to New South Wales yesterday from Queensland. I'm at Brunswick Heads at the moment. I got up early to watch the sunrise and talk about this, because again, a few people have been asking about it over the past few days and the subject's been coming up. So I figured I'd go into a bit of detail and try to, I don't know, share a little clarity around it. And I also just wanted to record the sunrise because it's so beautiful. And if you want to get into our actual useful spiritual practice, just do that. Wake up early, watch the sunrise, and just be present in the moment. Everything and anything you do can be a useful spiritual practice, or even if you think it's a spiritual practice, it can be a harmful delusion which adds further ignorance and suffering to your existence. I have no idea where I'm gonna go or what I'm gonna do today.